Why was everyone ignoring the woman in maintenance coveralls? They didn't ask who she was, didn't check her file, didn't notice the faded calluses on her palms or the way her eyes tracked every exit in the room. To them, she was just another quiet woman, unremarkable, easy to overlook, the kind of person you'd forget the moment she walked past. That was their first mistake. She arrived at Harrington Aerospace Logistics on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, when the weather had turned gray and the wind cut through the hangar doors with a bite that made most people move faster. Not her. She took her time. A small duffel bag slung over one shoulder, worn leather, the kind that had traveled through more time zones than most people could count. A canvas work jacket, unmarked, faded at the elbows. Black combat boots, scuffed but maintained, the laces double knotted. Her name was Reynolds, at least that's what the ID badge said. Captain Alexis Reynolds, though she never told anyone her rank, never mentioned it, kept it quiet, kept everything quiet. The way she moved through the facility, methodical, precise, never wasting a gesture, it unsettled them in ways they couldn't quite name. Something about her stillness, something about the way she observed before she spoke, something about the way she carried herself, like she'd seen things they couldn't imagine and decided long ago that silence was safer than explanation. But they didn't see that. They saw coveralls. They saw a woman who kept to herself. They saw someone they could ignore. The facility was loud. Metal on metal, hydraulic hisses, engines warming up in test bays, radio chatter bouncing off corrugated walls, men shouting over machinery. The constant industrial symphony of an aerospace logistics operation where helicopters waited in various states of repair, where deadlines pressed like physical weight, where everyone had a role and everyone knew their place. Except her, she was new, and new meant vulnerable. She spent the first 3 days observing, learning the layout, understanding the rhythms, who reported to who had influence, who was competent, who was coasting, who was dangerous. She took notes in a small notebook she never opened in public, just observations, patterns, details that most people wouldn't notice but that told her everything she needed to know about how this place really worked. There were 3 of them, the ones who noticed her in all the wrong ways. Garrett Novick, mechanic, second shift, the kind of guy who'd never advanced past his own ego but somehow convinced everyone else he was in charge. He had that voice, the one that carried across the hangar floor, the one that demanded attention even when he had nothing worth saying. Mid-30s, broad shoulders, the kind of confidence that came from never being seriously challenged. His shadows followed him everywhere. Derek Hollies, thick-necked and aggressive, all muscle and no sense, the enforcer type, the one who turned conversations into confrontations because he didn't know any other language. He stood too close when he talked, invaded space like it was his right. His presence alone was a kind of threat. And Tomas Reeves, the grin and nod type, the one who laughed at whatever Novick said because it was easier than thinking for himself, smaller than the other 2, but no less dangerous. The kind who went along with things because he lacked the spine to object, and that made him unpredictable in all the worst ways. They'd been watching her all week, not obvious about it, just tracking, making note of when she was alone, when the supervisors were in meetings, when the floor was thin, when she'd be vulnerable. They found her in the East Hangar around 2 p.m. on Friday. Not by accident, deliberate. They'd been waiting for this moment. The hangar was nearly empty. Most of the crew had scattered for lunch or moved to other sections. The overhead lights cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Somewhere in the back, a radio played classic rock, barely audible over the ambient mechanical noise. She was checking hydraulic lines on a Sikorsky frame, her attention entirely on the equipment. "Well, well," Novick's voice bounced off the metal walls. "Look who's still here." Reynolds didn't turn around. Her hands continued their methodical work, tracing pressure lines, checking connections, not ignoring him, just uninterested. "I'm talking to you," Novick called out louder this time. his boots heavy on the concrete. "New girl, you deaf or just stuck up?" She glanced back once, that was all, a single look, eyes level, expression blank. Then she turned back to the hydraulics. What happened next wasn't random. It was calculated, deliberate. The kind of thing that happens when three men convince themselves that silence equals permission. Holly's moved first, a shoulder check designed to throw her off balance. She absorbed it, feet firm, didn't react. That emboldened them. Reeves laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed through the empty hangar. "Maybe we need to get her attention," Novak said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear this wasn't about attention anymore. He grabbed her arm, not hard, just aggressive, a test. She pulled free, clean and controlled, but didn't say anything, didn't yell, didn't threaten. She just stepped back and returned to the hydraulic lines like they'd never interrupted her. That refusal to engage infuriated him more than any response would have. "You think you're too good to talk to us," Novak circled, playing to his audience of two. "You come in here with your quiet act, your gloves, your little notebook, acting like you're better than everyone else, like you don't need to explain yourself to anyone." Still nothing from Reynolds, just the sound of a wrench against metal. Holly's grabbed her shoulder this time, spun her around. "When he's talking to you, you answer," he said. His voice dropped into that register where violence lives. And that's when it escalated. Reynolds turned to face them, eyes steady. Novak saw something in her expression that made him hesitate for exactly 1 second. 1 second too long, but pride doesn't pause for reason. He shoved her hard toward the metal equipment rack. She hit the corner edge, caught herself with one hand, blood immediate on her lip where it split against her teeth. She straightened, touched her mouth, looked at her fingers. Red, metallic, a taste she knew, a flavor she'd tasted before in places that would make Novak's parking lot bravado look like child's play. But instead of reacting, instead of the tears or the protests or the anger they expected, she just looked at them, all three, one to the next, calm, measured, like she was studying something fascinating, like she just learned exactly what she needed to know. "You should probably leave," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, almost conversational. Novak laughed. Holly's grinned. Reeves did what he always did and followed the lead. But there was something in Reynolds's eyes that didn't match her quiet tone, something in the way she set her jaw, something in the stillness of her body that suggested she wasn't afraid. She was just waiting. She walked past them without another word, past the equipment racks, past the supply lockers, toward the administration wing, didn't run, didn't cry, didn't file a complaint right away, at least not where anyone could see. She just disappeared into the back corridors of Harrington Aerospace, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And that's when the real story began. What did they miss when they looked at her? Captain Alexis Reynolds had been in the military for 18 years, but no one at Harrington Aerospace Logistics needed to know that. Her file said she was maintenance personnel, transferred from a facility in the Pacific Northwest, recommended by someone in HR who'd never actually met her. The paperwork was impeccable. The background was clean. The references checked out. But the truth, the real truth, was buried 3 levels deep in classified channels that required clearance codes and encrypted access. Naval aviator, combat pilot, over 2,000 flight hours in hostile environments, black belt in Taekwondo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, certified tactical instructor, active duty credentials that would make most people on that facility look like they were playing soldier. She'd flown missions that didn't exist in official records, had landed helicopters on moving ships in weather that grounded entire air wings, had made split-second decisions at altitudes where mistakes meant death, not just for her, but for everyone counting on her to get it right. And she'd done it all quietly, without fanfare, without needing anyone to know how capable she was. because the most dangerous people rarely announce themselves. She'd come to Harrington Aerospace for one reason: a special assignment, deep cover, evaluating operations from the inside, the kind of work that required her to blend in, to observe without being observed, to document without drawing attention. And the last thing she expected was to be tested by three mechanics who had no idea they were about to teach her exactly what she needed to know about the culture of this place. But that lesson was about to come due. The administration wing was quieter than the hangar floor, carpeted hallways instead of concrete, fluorescent lights instead of industrial fixtures, the hum of computers and climate control instead of hydraulic systems and engine tests. Reynolds walked with purpose but without urgency. Her split lip had stopped bleeding, but the taste lingered, copper and salt, a reminder, not of pain but of clarity. She'd been assaulted before, not in training exercises or controlled environments, in real situations where the threat was immediate and the consequences permanent. She knew what fear tasted like, knew what adrenaline felt like coursing through her system, knew the difference between danger and theater. This was theater. Novick and his crew were performing dominance, not executing violence. They were testing boundaries, not eliminating threats. And that told her everything she needed to know about how far they'd gone before and how confident they were that there would be no consequences. The security office was tucked at the end of a side corridor, small, unremarkable, a single door with frosted glass and a nameplate that read Facility Security M. Chen. She knocked once, waited. "Come in." The woman behind the desk was maybe 40, Asian American, wearing business casual and the expression of someone who'd seen too much workplace nonsense to be surprised by anything. Margaret Chen, former military police. Reynolds had read her file 3 days ago. "Ms. Reynolds," Chen said, looking up from her computer. Then she saw the blood on Reynolds's lip. Her expression shifted, not shock, recognition. "Sit down." Reynolds sat, didn't explain, didn't justify, just sat and waited. Chen closed her laptop, folded her hands on the desk. "Tell me what happened." And Reynolds did, calmly, methodically, no emotion, no embellishment, just facts, time, location, names, actions, sequence of events. The kind of report she'd filed 100 times in 100 different contexts. When she finished, Chen was silent for a long moment. "You're not the first," she finally said. Reynolds wasn't surprised. Patterns like this didn't start with her. They built over time. They required a culture that tolerated them. They needed people in positions of minor authority who learned that silence meant permission. "How many others?" Reynolds asked. "3 that I know of, 2 who reported it, 1 who didn't but talk to a friend who talked to me." Chen's jaw tightened. Different degrees, verbal harassment mostly, some physical intimidation, nothing quite this overt. "And what happened?" "Nothing substantial, verbal warnings, mediation sessions. HR documented it but—" Chen trailed off. The "but" hung in the air like smoke, but nothing really changed. But the culture protected them. But it was easier to manage the victims than confront the perpetrators. Reynolds understood. She'd seen it before, in military units, in civilian organizations, in places where the informal power structure mattered more than the official one, where people like Novick built influence not through competence but through intimidation, and where challenging that influence required more institutional courage than most supervisors possessed. "What do you want to do?" Chen asked, and there was something in her voice that suggested this question mattered, that Reynolds's answer would determine more than just her own case. Reynolds thought about that, about what she wanted, about what would actually change things versus what would just create more paperwork and more resentment and more careful versions of the same behavior. She thought about the duffel bag in her barracks room, about the black belt wrapped in cloth at the bottom, about the years of training that had taught her that real strength wasn't about proving you could win a fight. It was about choosing which battles actually mattered. "I want it documented," Reynolds said. "Officially, with security footage if you have it, with medical documentation of the injury, with a formal complaint that goes into their personnel files." Chen nodded. "That's standard. What else?" Reynolds met her eyes. "I want to know if there's anyone in the command structure here who actually cares about fixing this, not just managing it, fixing it." Chen was quiet for a moment, then she picked up her phone. "Let me make a call," she said. Who would believe her word against theirs? That was the question everyone expected her to worry about, the one that made most people hesitate, the one that convinced them silence was safer than speaking. But Reynolds wasn't most people. Margaret Chen made 3 phone calls. The first was to the facility's medical office, requesting documentation of Reynolds' injury. The second was to the IT department, requesting security footage from the East Hangar between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m. The third was to someone Chen didn't name, someone whose title wasn't mentioned, someone who apparently had the authority to set things in motion that couldn't be easily stopped. Within an hour, Reynolds was sitting in the medical office while a nurse practitioner photographed her split lip, documented the bruising that was already forming along her jaw, and asked careful questions about whether she felt safe returning to her assigned quarters. "I'm fine," Reynolds said, and she meant it, not because nothing had happened, but because she'd survived worse and knew how to compartmentalize fear. The nurse practitioner, a woman named Tors with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd served, didn't look convinced. "You don't have to be fine," she said gently. "You can be not fine and still be safe." Reynolds appreciated that, the permission to not perform strength, but she also knew her own limits, knew when she was actually in danger versus when she was just processing anger. "I understand," Reynolds said, "and I appreciate your concern, but I'm not in crisis. I'm just documenting an assault." Tors nodded, finished her exam, printed the medical report and handed it to Reynolds in a sealed envelope. "For security," she said, "and if you change your mind about needing support, my office is open." By evening, the security footage had been reviewed. Margaret Chen called Reynolds to her office and showed her the video, grainy but clear. Wide-angle camera mounted high in the East Hangar's northeast corner. Time-stamped. Audio faint but present. Reynolds watched herself check hydraulic lines, watched Novik approach, watched the escalation, watched herself get shoved into the equipment rack, watched blood appear on her lip. It was strange, seeing herself from outside, seeing how small she looked compared to the 3 men, seeing how calm she remained even as violence approached, seeing the exact moment when she decided not to fight back, not because she couldn't but because she'd already chosen a different strategy. "This is pretty clear," Chen said. Reynolds nodded. "It is. The question now is what happens next. Standard protocol would be a formal investigation, interviews with all parties, potential disciplinary action ranging from suspension to termination depending on findings." Chen paused. "But there's another option." "Which is?" "Command review. This goes up the chain, not to the facility manager. Higher, to the people who actually have the authority to change culture, not just punish individuals." Reynolds understood what Chen was really saying, that this could be bigger than 3 mechanics, that this could be about the systems that allowed 3 mechanics to feel comfortable assaulting someone in an empty hangar. "How high?" Reynolds asked. Chen smiled slightly. "High enough that they'll care, high enough that they'll actually read the report instead of just filing it." "And you think that will matter?" "I think," Chen said carefully, "that you're not the person they expected to hit. And I think when they realize who you actually are, they're going to understand they made a very expensive mistake." Reynolds felt something shift in her chest. Not satisfaction, not quite, more like recognition. The understanding that sometimes the right thing and the strategic thing aligned perfectly. "Do it," she said. That night in her barracks room, Reynolds sat on the edge of her bed with her notebook open. She'd filled 3 pages with observations about Harrington Aerospace, the formal power structure versus the informal one, the people who had influence and the people who had authority, and the gap between those two things, the culture that rewarded volume over competence, the way certain behaviors were tolerated until they became normalized. She added a new entry: brief, factual, no judgment, just documentation. Assault occurred 1400 hours East Hangar, 3 perpetrators. Novick, Hollies, Reeves. Documented via security footage and medical exam. Formal complaint filed. Command review requested. Awaiting response. Then she closed the notebook, wrapped it in its protective cover, put it back in the duffel. Tomorrow would tell her whether this place was salvageable, or whether the rot went too deep, whether the command structure would actually respond, or whether they'd find ways to minimize and manage and move on. But tonight she just needed to rest. She thought about the black belt at the bottom of her bag, about the years of training that had taught her when to strike and when to wait, about the instructors who drilled into her that real discipline wasn't about proving yourself. It was about choosing your moments. She could have fought back, could have put Hollies on the ground in about 3 seconds, could have demonstrated exactly how outmatched they were. But that would have made her the aggressor, would have shifted the narrative, would have given them ammunition to claim she was dangerous, unstable, not fit for the workplace. Instead, she'd documented. She'd used the system. She'd created a record that couldn't be argued with or dismissed. And now she'd wait to see if the system actually worked. Because that's what real strength looked like. Not the ability to win every fight, but the wisdom to know which fights were worth winning and which ones were better won through patience, documentation, and institutional pressure. She turned off the light, lay down in the darkness, let her mind settle. Somewhere in the facility, Novick and Hollies and Reeves were probably laughing about the quiet woman they'd put in her place, probably congratulating themselves on teaching her a lesson, probably assuming that tomorrow would be just like yesterday, that nothing would change, that they were untouchable. They had no idea what was coming. And Reynolds, in her dark room with her split lips slowly healing, allowed herself the smallest smile. Not a victory, not yet. Just anticipation. What happens when the quiet ones finally speak? Monday morning arrived with rain. Heavy, cold, the kind that turned the facility's parking lot into a patchwork of puddles and made everyone move faster between buildings. Reynolds arrived at her usual time, 6:30 a.m., 45 minutes before her shift officially started. She liked the quiet of early mornings, the way the hangar felt before it filled with noise and bodies, the way she could move through spaces without navigation or performance, just work, just focus. But this morning was different. Marcus Thornton, the East Hangar supervisor, was waiting for her near the equipment lockers. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, the kind of man who'd spent 30 years in aerospace maintenance and earned every line on his face. He held a clipboard and the expression of someone about to have a conversation he didn't want. "Reynolds," he said, "got a minute?" She nodded, set down her duffel, waited. "Look," Thornton said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. "I heard about what happened Friday, with Novick and his guys." Reynolds didn't respond, just listened. "I want you to know that's not how we operate here. That's not the culture I'm trying to build, and I'm sorry it happened on my watch." He meant it. She could hear that, could see it in the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes, in the tension in his shoulders. This was a man who cared about his team, who took responsibility seriously, and who was now facing the reality that he'd missed something important. "I appreciate that," Reynolds said quietly. "There's going to be a formal investigation," Thornton continued. "Company policy. HR will interview everyone involved. Security's already pulled the footage. Command's been notified. This is going to go through proper channels." Reynolds nodded. Good. In the meantime, Thornton said, and here his voice firmed up, became more official, Novick, Hollies, and Reeves have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. They're not allowed on facility grounds. If they contact you, you're to report it immediately. Understood. Thornton finally looked at her directly. I know this doesn't undo what happened. I know it doesn't make it okay. But I want you to know we're taking this seriously. And whatever comes out of this investigation, there will be consequences. Reynolds believed him. She'd gotten good at reading people over the years, at distinguishing between those who performed concern and those who actually felt it. Thornton was genuine, limited by bureaucracy and institutional inertia maybe, but genuine. Thank you, she said. He nodded, started to leave, then turned back. One more thing, he said. I pulled your file this weekend, the official one, the one HR gave me when you transferred in. Reynolds kept her expression neutral, waited. It's pretty thin, Thornton said. Just basic maintenance experience. Some references. Nothing that explains why a facility this size would hire someone with no specialized aerospace background. And, Reynolds asked, though she already knew where this was going. And I'm starting to think there might be another file, one I don't have access to, one that would explain why Margaret Chen made 3 phone calls Friday afternoon to people whose names she wouldn't share with me. Reynolds said nothing, confirmed nothing, but she didn't deny it either. Thornton studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly. You know what? I don't need to know. Whatever you're really here for, whoever you actually are, I'm just glad you're on our side. He walked away before she could respond. Reynolds stood alone in the quiet hangar for a moment, processing. The investigation was moving. Command was involved. Novick and his crew were off the floor. The system, against all odds, appeared to be working. But she knew better than to assume that meant it was over. The next 3 days were strange. Word spread fast in a facility like Harrington. Not official word, but the kind that moves through break rooms and smoke breaks and quiet conversations in corners. Everyone knew something had happened. Everyone knew Novick and his guys were gone. Everyone was trying to figure out what it meant. Reynolds worked through it all with the same quiet focus she'd maintained since arrival. Checking systems, logging maintenance, taking notes. The crew around her was different now, more careful, more respectful. Some of them nodded when she passed. Some asked if she was okay. Some just gave her space. She appreciated the space most. Wednesday afternoon, she was called to a conference room in the administration building. Margaret Chen was there, Marcus Thornton, and 2 people Reynolds had never seen before. The first was a woman in her late 40s, black, wearing a business suit and the bearing of someone who'd spent time in uniform. Her nameplate read, Director Sarah Okonkwo, Regional Operations. The second was a man, early 60s, white, silver hair, the kind of quiet authority that didn't need introduction. He didn't have a nameplate, didn't need one. Reynolds sat where directed, hands folded, posture perfect, waiting. Director Okonkwo spoke first. Ms. Reynolds, thank you for your patience with this process. I know it's been a difficult week. It's been productive, Reynolds said. Okonkwo smiled slightly. That's one way to describe it. Let me bring you up to speed on where things stand. We've completed the initial investigation. We've reviewed the security footage. We've conducted interviews with multiple witnesses. And we've examined the medical documentation. She paused, let that settle. The findings are clear. You were assaulted by 3 employees while performing your assigned duties. The assault was unprovoked, aggressive, and violated multiple company policies regarding workplace conduct and safety. Reynolds nodded. None of this was surprising. Mr. Novick, Mr. Hollies, and Mr. Reeves have been terminated effective immediately. They will not be returning to this facility or any other facility operated by this organization. There it was, the consequence, clean, final, exactly what the situation required. Additionally, Okonkwo continued, we've initiated a broader review of workplace culture across all maintenance operations. This incident revealed systemic issues that go beyond 3 individuals. We're implementing new training protocols, new reporting structures, and new accountability measures to ensure this doesn't happen again. The unnamed man spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried weight. Ms. Reynolds, we owe you an apology. This should never have happened. You came here to do a job and instead you were subjected to assault. That failure is on us, not on you. Reynolds looked at him. Really looked. Saw the 4 stars on his lapel pin, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Saw the way everyone else in the room deferred to him without even realizing it. Senior command. The kind that didn't visit facilities unless something mattered. I appreciate that, sir, she said. He nodded. I've read your actual file, the classified one. I know why you're really here. And I know this incident probably gave you exactly the information you were sent to gather. Reynolds didn't confirm or deny, just held his gaze. So let me ask you directly, he said. Is this facility salvageable, or do we need to make more fundamental changes? It was the question she'd been waiting for, the one that mattered, the one that would determine whether this had all been worth it. It's salvageable, Reynolds said. The rot isn't systemic, it's localized. You have good people here who care about the work and care about each other. You have supervisors like Mr. Thornton who take responsibility seriously. You have security personnel like Ms. Chen who recognize problems and don't look away. She paused, chose her next words carefully. But you have a culture that rewards volume over competence. That confuses authority with loudness. That allows people like Novik to build informal power structures that undermine formal ones. And until you address that, you'll keep producing people like Novik. The room was silent. No one argued, no one objected. How do we fix it? Okonkwo asked. You're already starting, Reynolds said. Termination sends a message. Broader cultural review sends a bigger one. But the real fix is elevating the people who have been doing it right all along and making sure everyone understands that competence and character matter more than charisma and noise. Thornton shifted in his seat, looked at the floor. Reynolds could tell he understood she was talking about him. The unnamed officer nodded. Consider it done. Thank you for your service, Captain Reynolds, both the official kind and the unofficial kind. The meeting ended. Reynolds returned to the hangar, finished her shift, went back to her barracks. That evening she received new orders, encrypted message, brief, professional. Assignment complete, well done. Next posting TBD, stand by for further instructions. She'd be gone by the end of the week, off to another facility, another mission, another situation where someone needed to observe without being observed. But this one mattered. This one had actually changed something. She allowed herself to feel satisfied, just for a moment, just enough. How do you rebuild trust after everything breaks? The last 2 days at Harrington Aerospace felt different. Reynolds could sense it in the way people moved through the hangar, in the conversations at shift change, in the careful way certain behaviors were suddenly checked before they became actions. Change didn't happen overnight, she knew that. But change could start overnight, and that's what this felt like, the beginning of something different. Friday morning, she arrived to find a new crew member working the East Hangar section. Young woman, maybe mid-20s, with the nervous energy of someone fresh to industrial work. She was struggling with a torque wrench, trying to remember the proper sequence for rotor hub maintenance. Reynolds watched for a moment, saw Thornton watching too, waiting to see what would happen. She walked over. You're cross-threading, Reynolds said quietly. Here, let me show you. The young woman, her name tag read Alvarez, looked grateful and embarrassed at the same time. Sorry, I'm still learning the equipment. Everyone is, Reynolds said. That's why we check each other's work. She demonstrated the proper technique, showed her how to feel for the resistance, how to know when something was right versus when it was forced. Then she stepped back and let Alvarez try it herself. Good, Reynolds said when the younger woman got it right. Now do it 4 more times until it's muscle memory. Alvarez nodded, got back to work. Thornton approached after Alvarez moved to the next component. That was good of you, he said. Reynolds shrugged. That's how it's supposed to work. Yeah, Thornton said, it is. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the hangar operations flow around them. You know you're leaving a hole when you go, Thornton said. Whoever you really are, whatever you're really doing here, you made a difference. People notice that. People always notice, Reynolds said. They just don't always say anything. Well, I'm saying something. Thornton met her eyes. Thank you. She nodded, accepted it, let it matter without making a production of it. That afternoon, Margaret Chen stopped by the hangar. Not official business, just checking in. They stood by the equipment lockers, out of the main flow of foot traffic. I wanted to give you an update, Chen said. All 3 of them are officially gone. Novik tried to appeal the termination, got a lawyer, whole thing. But the footage and the medical documentation made it pretty clear-cut. He's done. And the others? Reynolds asked. Hollies took a severance package and signed an NDA. Reeves just disappeared, probably too embarrassed to fight it. Chen paused. There's been some chatter, you know, among the other employees, about what happened, about why it happened. What kind of chatter? The good kind, Chen said. The kind where people are reassessing their own behavior. The kind where they're realizing that maybe the old ways don't fly anymore. That maybe there are consequences now for things that used to slide. Reynolds allowed herself a small smile. That's progress. It is, and it's because of you, because you didn't just accept it, because you used the system instead of just suffering through it or quitting. Chen's expression softened. A lot of people would have handled this differently, made it loud, made it ugly, created more damage than solution. You gave the system a chance to work, and it did. The system worked because you made the right calls, Reynolds said. Because Thornton backed the investigation. Because Command actually cared about the findings. I just documented what happened. You did more than that, Chen said. But I know you don't need me to tell you that. They parted with mutual respect. 2 professionals who understood that sometimes the work was messy, and sometimes the work mattered, and sometimes both things were true at the same time. Saturday, Reynolds' last shift, she spent the morning doing final equipment checks and completing paperwork. The hangar was busy, the usual weekend maintenance rush. She moved through it all methodically, making sure everything was logged properly, everything was documented, everything was ready for whoever came next. Around noon, Thornton called the East Hangar crew together for a brief announcement. Maybe 20 people gathered near the main workstations. Reynolds stood at the back, curious. I want everyone to meet our new lead technician, Thornton said, gesturing to a woman Reynolds had seen around but never formally met. Elena Suarez. She's been with the company for 8 years, has the certifications, has the experience, and has my complete confidence. If you have questions, if you need support, if you run into problems, she's your first point of contact. Suarez nodded to the group. Confident but not arrogant, competent but not condescending, exactly what the position required. We're making some changes around here, Thornton continued. Some of you have already noticed. New protocols, new expectations, new accountability. This isn't about punishing anyone or making your jobs harder. It's about building the kind of environment where everyone can do their best work without worrying about who's watching their back. He paused, let that land. We've had problems. We've had situations that shouldn't have happened. We're fixing that. And part of fixing it means promoting people who have been doing it right all along, even when it wasn't easy. A few people glanced at Reynolds. She kept her expression neutral. "That's all," Thornton said. "Get back to it." The crew dispersed. Reynolds returned to her final tasks. Late afternoon, she packed up her gear, the small duffel bag, the canvas work jacket, the black combat boots, the notebook with its careful observations and documented patterns, the black belt at the bottom of the bag, still wrapped, still unused in the way they'd expected her to use it. She'd proven her point without proving herself, had demonstrated strength without demonstration, had changed the culture without declaring war on it. And that felt right. She walked through the hangar one last time, past the equipment she'd maintained, past the people she'd worked alongside, past the spaces where violence had happened and justice had followed. No one threw her a party, no one made speeches. That wasn't the kind of place this was, but people nodded as she passed. Some shook her hand. Some just met her eyes and held the contact long enough to communicate respect. That was enough. Outside, the sky had cleared. Late afternoon sun cutting through the clouds. Her truck was parked in the back lot, exactly where she'd left it when she arrived. She threw her duffel in the back, started the engine, let it warm up. Thought about the last week. About Novick and his crew learning that silence didn't mean weakness. About Thornton learning to trust his own judgment about people. About the young technician, Alvarez, learning her craft in an environment that would now support instead of undermine her. About systems that worked when good people used them properly. She put the truck in gear, drove toward the facility exit. At the gate, the security officer waved her through. Young guy, probably new. He glanced at her ID, checked his computer, then looked up with a slightly confused expression. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, "says here you're cleared for exit, but there's a note in the system. Just says thank you for your service." Reynolds smiled. "Tell whoever left that note they're welcome." She drove away from Harrington Aerospace Logistics as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Another assignment complete. Another culture shifted. Another message delivered. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.